The moving truck was already backed into the driveway when my uncle called to tell me it was there. That detail, that he called after the fact, like he was giving me a courtesy heads up instead of asking permission, told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he'd thought this through. His voice was easy, almost bored. "We're starting the transition this weekend," he said. "We figured you'd want time to get your personal things out before we bring in an appraiser." I was sitting at my desk in Nashville when he said it. I remember the way the light came through the blinds. I remember setting my coffee down so I didn't crush it. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said. He laughed a little. "It's already done, Brett." It wasn't. 2 days later, when my uncle and cousin showed up with a locksmith to change the deadbolts, a Blount County Sheriff's deputy was already parked in the gravel turnaround by the barn, and the man standing on the porch holding a folder wasn't me. It was my attorney, who had driven 2 hours from Knoxville just to make sure there was no misunderstanding. "My name is Brett. The farm is still mine, and I want to tell you how that happened because it didn't happen by luck. Before I do, if you're watching, say hello in the comments. Tell me where you're from. I always want to know how far these stories travel. It helps to know someone out there is listening. My parents divorced when I was 8. I won't spend much time on that, except to say it happened the way those things do. Slow at once, in a way that left a kid with a suitcase and no clear idea which parent was coming to pick him up. Neither of them was bad. They just weren't ready for a child in the middle of their own collapse. And I spent the next 3 years being passed between apartments like a library book. Nobody was quite sure how to return. My grandparents' farm changed that. It sat on 92 acres outside a small town in East Tennessee. County Road, red clay, a creek that ran high in March and dropped to ankle deep by August. My grandfather Rupert had worked that land since he was 19. My grandmother Mabel had the kind of hands that could coax a half-dead tomato plant back to life, and also deliver a piece of hard truth without flinching. When I was 11, they took me in for a summer. When fall came, nobody brought up the subject of leaving, and I stayed. There were no comparisons at the farm, no games about who I was supposed to love more, or whose weekend it was. My grandfather taught me how to run a tractor, how to read a fence line, how to tell when a storm was building by the way the light changed over the ridge. My grandmother taught me everything else, the patience that comes from waiting on something to grow, the dignity of keeping your word even when it costs you. I didn't know it then, but those two people were building something in me that would hold long after they were gone. I left for college on a partial scholarship and weekend cash I'd earned doing farm work for neighbors. Came back every break, called every Sunday, got my civil engineering degree, took a job in Nashville, and still drove the 3 hours east every other weekend to sit on that porch and fix whatever needed fixing. After my grandfather passed 2 years ago, quiet in the night the way he would have chosen, those trips got longer. I started staying Friday through Sunday, sometimes Monday too. My uncle Dwayne lived in Knoxville, 45 minutes from the farm. He came by maybe 4 times a year, holidays mostly. He had opinions about everything, the equipment, the fencing, the rate the property taxes were climbing. But none of those opinions ever came with work boots on. He and my Aunt Rochelle treated my grandmother's house like a restaurant they had strong feelings about, but only visited when it was convenient for them. His son, my cousin Sean, had his real estate license and a personality built for selling things to people who hadn't quite made up their minds yet. 6 weeks before my grandmother died, she called me on a Wednesday morning and said, "I need you to come this weekend, just you." I drove down that Friday. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of sweet tea and a manila envelope in front of her, and she didn't waste any time getting to it. "The will is filed," she said. "Howard Alderman has a copy, and the probate court has a copy. I want you to hear it from me before you hear it anywhere else." She had left the farm, the accounts, the equipment, everything to me, sole heir. She said my uncle had received a portion of her parents' estate years ago and had spent it inside of 3 years. She said this without bitterness, the way you state a fact that's simply true. She said she wasn't trying to punish anyone. She was trying to make sure the land stayed land. "Your grandfather and I talked about this for a long time," she told me. "We want it kept, not sold. 5 years at minimum. After that, it's your call, and I trust you to make the right one." Then she asked me to do something I hadn't expected. She asked me to record her. She sat up straight in that kitchen chair and looked directly into my phone camera and said her full name and the date and exactly what she wanted and why. She explained that the farm needed someone who would work it, maintain it, keep it in the family name. She was calm and clear and specific. When she finished, she said, "Good, now let's have dinner." She passed 6 weeks later, peacefully at home with me there. The reading of the will was 2 days after the funeral. My uncle sat across the table from Howard Alderman and kept his face very still. When it was over, he shook Howard's hand and told me he'd be in touch. The text came the next morning. "We need to talk about what's fair." I didn't respond. 3 days later, I drove out to check on the property and found my cousin Sean walking the north field with a woman I didn't recognize. She was carrying a clipboard. Sean had his hands in his pockets and was pointing toward the tree line like someone showing off a view to a buyer. I pulled into the drive and rolled my window down. Sean waved, easy, as if he weren't standing on land he had no claim to. He said the woman was just a friend interested in the area. She said hello without looking up from her clipboard. I said I had some things to do inside and they'd need to finish up. They left without much fuss, but I sat in the truck for a while after they drove away. My neighbor Norm had been on the land next door for 40 years. He was in his 70s, moved slow, and had a memory for detail that would have made him a good investigator in another life. He came over that evening while I was fixing the screen door and leaned against the porch rail, said Sean had come by his place the week before, asked about the access road on the east side, who owned the right-of-way, whether the county had ever disputed the property line up near the ridge, said he was helping the family figure out next steps. He had a notepad, Norm told me, and he was writing things down. I thanked him, went inside and called Howard Alderman. Howard told me what I needed to do. Then I told him what I'd already started doing, and he said, "Good, keep going." I'd been thinking about this possibility for longer than I'd like to admit. At my grandfather's funeral 2 years before, my uncle had made an offhand comment at dinner about the farm being a lot to manage alone. It had the shape of a suggestion, but the weight of something being measured. I'd filed that away. Now I started moving. Howard helped me establish an LLC. The farm transferred into it. Utilities, electric, water, internet, all shifted to the entity. New bank accounts. I changed the locks the following weekend with deadbolts I bought 3 counties over, paid cash. 1 key in my wallet, 1 in a fireproof box at my apartment. A friend from college, Gus, drove down from Chattanooga with a duffel bag of camera equipment. He was quiet about it, methodical. We tucked a wide-angle lens above the barn door, 1 under the porch eave, 1 inside the mudroom window angled toward the driveway. Everything fed to my phone and backed up to a cloud account and a local drive Gus zip-tied inside the breaker panel. If someone pulls the main line, he said, it chirps to a secondary drive. I started a log in a spiral notebook, blue cover, date at the top of every entry, every call, every text, every drive-by that didn't feel accidental. My uncle called 4 times over the next 2 weeks. I let 3 go to voicemail. The messages were a slow escalation, casual at first, then warmer, then edged with something I can only describe as aggrieved. He wanted to sit down like adults. He wanted to talk about what my grandmother would have actually wanted. He said the will might not reflect her state of mind in her final weeks. That last one I wrote down word for word. My Aunt Rochelle called once, with a softer approach. She talked about family unity, the difficulty of grief, how young I was to be managing something this large. She said my cousin Sean had real experience with property and could be enormous help. She said all of it in the warm, patient tone of someone who believed she was doing me a favor. When she finished, I said I was grateful she'd called, and that the estate had clear direction, and I was following it. She paused, then said she hoped I'd think about it some more. I said I would. A week later, the family group chat my grandmother had set up 3 Christmases ago started filling with messages. An aunt from Memphis posted about grief and family bonds. A cousin I'd seen twice in a decade chimed in with a Bible verse about inheritance. My uncle wrote a long paragraph about what my grandfather would have wanted, which he prefaced with, "I think we all know," and then proceeded to invent. I read everything, I responded to none of it, I screenshot every message. My cousin posted on Facebook a photo of the farm, the one he must have taken when he was walking the north field, with a caption about watching a family's legacy be swallowed by greed and paperwork. It got 43 likes. Several relatives left heart emojis underneath. I printed the screenshot and added it to the folder. One Sunday, my uncle hosted what he called a family dinner. I went, because sometimes you need to see the board up close. The house smelled like my aunt's pot roast and something floral she'd sprayed to cover it. For the first half hour, we talked about weather, a neighbor's new truck, a town council vote about a stop sign. The kind of conversation that exists to use up time before the real thing starts. Then my uncle set his fork down and said the word fairness, like naming it made it real. He said it would be fair for me to let my cousin co-manage the property. Sean had experience. The farm could be a cornerstone for the family to build on together. I sipped my water and said the estate had clear directions, and I was following them. My aunt tried the softer angle. She said the house was too much for one person. She said Sean had a vision. She said it was wasteful to lock something down when it could be put to use. I smiled and said nothing more. The food went quiet on the plates. My aunt cleared the dishes with quick hands and changed the subject to a fundraiser, a remodel down the road, a new coffee place by the highway. An old trick. If you don't like the answer, drown it in noise. When I left, I paused in the hallway to tie my shoe. My uncle's voice carried from the kitchen. He won't budge, he said low. We need to think about this differently. I stepped outside and stood on the front porch for a moment in the cold air. The next week, my cousin Sean showed up at the farm with a woman he introduced as a decorator friend visiting the area. She walked through the house commenting on ceilings, natural light, the original hardwood. She measured the kitchen doorway with a small tape that she pulled from her coat pocket. Sean drifted toward the study and asked casually whether I still kept the deed and paperwork in the desk. I said I'd moved important documents to safer storage, which was true. He laughed and said I was becoming such an adult, and they left 15 minutes later. The camera alert at 2:17 a.m. woke me from a light sleep. I opened the feed on my phone and watched. My cousin's truck sat dark at the edge of the driveway. He walked to the barn's side door and tested the latch, once, twice, pressing his shoulder against it. The security light mounted above the door flooded on. He stepped back into the shadows, waited, then got in the truck and drove away. I saved the clip to both drives, printed a still frame and dated it, wrote the time in the notebook with a long underline. Then Howard called with something that changed the shape of everything. Someone had filed a handwritten codicil to my grandmother's will with the probate court. The document claimed to be a late amendment, dated 3 weeks before she died, and it would have split the farm 50-50 between me and my uncle. It bore a notary stamp. The stamp belonged to a notary whose license had been suspended by the state board 14 months earlier. The signature didn't match my grandmother's other documents. Howard had already had it looked at. I sat with that for a moment. Then I opened my phone and found the video she'd recorded in her kitchen, 6 weeks before she passed. Straight back, clear eyes, her name and the date spoken aloud at the start, full sentences, specific wishes. Her voice steady the whole way through, the way it always was when she had something important to say. I texted Howard, I have something you're going to want to see. The Saturday they chose was cold and blue-skied. I was on the porch before 8 with a cup of coffee, and I'd already made 2 phone calls, one to Howard, one to Norm, whose son-in-law worked for the Blount County Sheriff's Department. I told Norm there might be an attempt to access the property that day, and that I'd appreciate a friendly witness with a badge. Norm said he'd make a call. I heard the engines before I saw the headlights clear the bend in the county road. My uncle's pickup first, my aunt's SUV, then a white moving truck with a rental company logo on the side, its ramp already partway lowered before it had fully stopped. 4 men I didn't recognize climbed out. My cousin was out of the passenger seat before the door was fully open. My uncle crossed the yard holding a sheaf of papers. We're getting this done today, he said. It wasn't a question. He held out the codicil. I took it, read the first page slowly, read it again, noted the date, noted the stamp. Whose notary is this? I asked. It's legitimate, he said. Alderman doesn't speak for the whole estate. This person hasn't held a license in over a year, I said. I handed it back. I'd stop right here if I were you. I pulled out my phone and dialed Howard. He answered on the first ring. I put him on speaker and set the phone on the porch rail. Howard introduced himself and addressed my uncle by name. He explained the LLC, the property transfer, the video of my grandmother's stated and recorded wishes. He explained that the codicil had been flagged by the probate court and referred to the state attorney general's office for review. He said that any attempt to remove items from or alter the premises today would result in immediate filing for injunctive relief and a formal criminal referral. He paused. I'm advising everyone present who is not the trustee to leave the property now, he said. Norm's son-in-law pulled into the gravel turnaround in a Blount County cruiser, while Howard was still speaking. The four men from the moving truck had gone quiet. One of them had already taken a step back toward the ramp. Another was watching my uncle like he was waiting for a signal that wasn't going to come. My uncle looked at me. His face had changed entirely, the easy confidence gone, something smaller underneath. We're family, he said. His voice had dropped to something almost private. I know, I said. You had 2 years to show up after my grandfather died. You came to this farm 4 times. I came 46. I've got the log right here if you'd like to see it. My aunt put her hand to her mouth. My cousin stared at the gravel. The deputy stepped forward and asked, with a politeness that left no room for argument, that the property be vacated immediately. He said he would be writing a report. The rental men started raising the truck's ramp. My uncle stood where he was for another moment, jaw set, then turned and walked back to the pickup without another word. My aunt followed. My cousin was last. He looked back once, and whatever he saw in my face made him look away fast. I watched the moving truck follow them down the county road until it disappeared around the bend. I went inside and put the kettle on. The fake codicil went to the state bar that same week through Howard's office. The notary, whose stamp had been used without authorization, connected through a real estate deal of my cousin's from years back, faced a formal complaint. An investigation was opened. I assembled a 12-page packet, the LLC filing, the property transfer confirmation, the county records showing someone had requested a title search on the farm 2 months before my grandmother died, using my uncle's home address as the contact, the video my grandmother had recorded, the barn camera still from 2:17 a.m., the Facebook post, the log entries copied onto clean paper, dated and initialed. I emailed it to 21 family members on a Sunday afternoon. The group chat went silent. Over the following days, responses came in privately, a few apologies, mostly silence. The aunt from Memphis wrote, I didn't know, I'm sorry. I wrote back that I appreciated it, and I meant it. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from my uncle's attorney, a single page, all demands withdrawn, no further contact requested. I read it once, set it on the kitchen table next to my grandmother's butter dish, and went outside to work on the fence posts. The north stretch of fence had been on the list since my grandfather was alive, old cedar, some of it rotted through at the base. I'd bought the replacement posts in August, and they'd been sitting in the barn. I spent that Saturday setting them in, tamping the gravel collar, stretching new wire between them. The cold came down off the ridge, and the work was good. Norm came by in the afternoon with a casserole covered in foil. He set it on the porch rail and watched me work for a while without saying anything, which was his way of saying something. Your grandfather would have liked how you handled that, he said finally. I drove the tamping bar down and felt the post settle solid. I hope so, I said. That evening, I went through the last of my grandmother's things in the bedroom, her Bible on the nightstand, which I'd been putting off. I picked it up and a folded piece of paper slipped out from between the pages, the way things do when they've been kept there a long time, and finally decide the moment is right. Her handwriting, 3 lines. I knew you'd hold it, you always have. Don't be talked out of what you know is right. I stood there with the paper in my hands until the room went dark around me. There is something people say about holding your ground, that it is cold or selfish, or that it means you don't love the people you're saying no to. I used to half believe that. Standing in that room, I didn't anymore. Keeping a promise to someone who can no longer keep it themselves is not selfishness. It is the simplest, most honest form of love there is. My grandmother didn't give me that farm because she loved me more than she loved her son. She gave it to me because she had watched me, for 20 years, show up, and she trusted that I would keep showing up long after she was gone. That night I sat on the porch the same way I had 100 times before, and I listened to the creek running in the dark below the ridge, the same water my grandfather walked beside every morning before breakfast, the same sound. Some things are worth holding. You just have to decide that you are the one who is going to hold them.